Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of Unplugged with Ross. I am your host, Roslyn Miner, and today we're having a very interesting discussion to do with performance management. Actually, the topic of the day is why performance management doesn't work in organizations. It's you can actually have it two ways. For some people, it can sound taboo. For some, they don't have a problem with having a discussion on performance management. But tonight we will be demystifying what is performance management all about, and who better to have this conversation with than Stephen Olieka. Stephen Olieka is actually my HR colleague. He's my senior. He has more than 20 years experience in HR across a lot of industries, and not only across industry, but also a Pan-African touch. He is an engineer turned HR. So you can imagine how engineers think. They like to decode things, build things from scratch, and they will think out of the box. So have that at the back of your mind, and then you turn this person into this HR practitioner who's just simply amazing. He's previously held roles as head of HR and support services at AAR Hospital, HR segment head at Eastern Roofing and Steel Safal Group, HR director at Mumia Sugar, amongst other senior roles, and overseen HR strategies and operations across Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and many more demographics. So tonight he is going to help us understand performance management 101. But away from the HR and engineering mind, he is a conservationist at heart. Yeah, tree planting and beekeeping. That's Stephen Olieka for you. So before I hand over to, let us look at a couple of interesting statistics and facts when it comes to performance management. According to McKinsey, when individual goals are linked to business priorities, 46% of respondents say that their performance management works well, whilst 16% you will actually differ to that. When it is not linked to the goal of the organization, then it fails to work. Regular coaching by managers and ongoing feedback correlate strongly with fairness perceptions and better outcomes. For example, 68% say ongoing coaching and feedback positively impact individual performance. That's another study by McKinsey. Now, that is what works. What doesn't work? According to b2breviews.com, about 47% of employees report having no clear expectations of their role or performance, which undermines alignment and engagement. And I think a lot of people, especially people who are newbies in an organization, when they get the wrong induction from the word go, or even people that have been there for a long time, when there is no role clarity or clarity on the expectations of the role, then you have a huge disconnect. 58% of companies say their performance management process effective, meaning it is seen as a poor use of time and resources. To many, that sounds like a tick box. So that is what, some of the statistics or facts we have when it comes to performance management. I mean, last but not least, 69% of employees feel more engaged when performance expectations are clear. We all know that, when it comes to any employee in an organization, your performance determines, your growth within an organization, but it also has an impact to do with your engagement and your suitability with the organization at large. So, no further ado, I would like to welcome Stephen Olieka, who we will be having this interesting conversation with. Stephen, karibu sana.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Very, very honored to have you here. So, to start us off with this conversation, when you hear performance management, what is the first thing that comes to mind? A lot of people have missed perceptions or reactions when it comes to performance management. So help us understand, What is performance management, and what comes to mind often when people hear the word or the term performance management?
Thanks, Rosalind. Let me talk from my own experience because I have implemented performance management. I have gone into organizations and have organizations have implemented. In the organizations that I joined, I found performance management practice sometimes tried to improve what was happening in terms of performance management. What I observed across the board was it was a fear that was misunderstood and most of poorly handled in many organizations. It evokes mixed emotions. Why? Because there is a gap between what it can achieve as actual reality on the ground. So if you looked at the literature says it can make organizations very successful. But when organizations try to implement it, they fail. And they scratch their heads and they wonder, why are we not getting it? When it is properly implemented, it can actually drive significant business performance. And this data shows that 60% of organizations that implement it properly will outperform. And it will achieve very high engagement. In fact, 69% of organizations have been evaluated achieve very high engagement cost management. But it also shows a very high failure rate in many organizations, like I said, that 58% of companies find their data. And that is, they feel that undertaking this process is a waste of time. And so you can see then that depending on whom you are talking to, if you are talking to an organization that have done it well, they will be praising it and telling you that they are seeing value out of it. On the other hand, if you talk to an organization that has not done it, they will be telling you it's a waste of time. That's an highway mix.
Now, when it comes, you've mentioned something that is very critical. Organizations that have handled performance management well thrive,
Yes, yes,
and those that actually have not implemented it well, actually it turns out to be bothersome. It is another tick box.
yes.
So when this comes to play, are we looking at disengagement with line managers or the organization at whole?
So if you could just go back a bit, there was a break in the communication.
Sorry about that. My question is, you mentioned that organizations that have implemented performance management well thrive.
Yes,
They
yes,
actually see it as an enabler. For
yes,
those that have not implemented it well, it
yes,
is bothersome. It is
yes,
another tick box. Is
yes.
the disconnect coming in from employees? Is it coming in from line managers? Where is this disconnect coming in? Or rather, who takes ownership for performance management or performance as it is?
Now, if you look at performance, let's just look wholesomely at performance. We have performance at 2 or 3 levels. The first level is what we call corporate performance or business, and that is the ultimate goal. But that ultimate goal has been supported by performance at that level. That the different departments within the organization must pull their weight so that they contribute to the business performance. And then within each of those sections, you have individuals, employees, and their managers who also must pull their weight. But I would like to take you back a little. First, do they understand the main purpose of performance management? Why are we doing it? Now, at the corporate level, it helps us set the direction and the goals for it. But at the individual level, what performance management is supposed to do is to help employees produce their best, improve and optimize their performance. That's number one. Number two is that the employee goals, like I said, at a lower level, are driving into the overall performance of the organization. So they are.
Sorry about that, guys. We seem to have Stephen has dropped off, but he will be back in a minute. And he was talking about the 3 levels of performance: corporate level, departmental level, and individual level. Stephen, karibu sana. Sorry about that.
Yes, a bit of network issues, but I think I've tried to resolve that. So what I was saying is this: the one performance management is to align employee performance with corporate. So the goals at the employee level must drive the organizational. That is number one. Number two is that we want to identify the performance gaps for the employee and make sure that we are intervening. First, we identify the gaps, and secondly, we determine what is driving those gaps. Is it a skill tools issue? Is it a resources issue? Is it a time issue? For example, did we overload the employee with a load and all that? And so at every stage, we are checking to see why is the employee not performing, what is it, and we intervene. And that is what I'm calling improving and optimizing the employee. But last but not least is the employee has an expectation to grow their career. And we need a basis to make decisions on how that employee will grow, whether we will promote them, whether we will give them opportunities to learn about their career. So employee performance or performance management then helps us make critical decisions about the career. So once you have started off with the right reasons, once you've started off with the right reasons, which reasons are they? That you want to improve the employee performance. 2, you want to align employee goals. The goal. 3, you want to find good reasons to grow an employee's career. Then you will be on the right. And then now you start asking yourself other questions around the performance. Live with this.
That is a very interesting and critical thing when we talk about improving, optimizing, aligning the employee goal and the organizational goal. But you and I know sometimes the act between the employee ambition and the organization ambition, which will now bring me to this next question: how far have we drifted when it comes to what performance management is all about? How far have we drifted from the intent? Because I think oftentimes we really do not understand the core of it, why it is there in the first place. And because of poor communication, everyone is, they're having divergent views and pulling in different directions. So how have we drifted from the intent, and how can we come back to the core of what it is about?
So if you look at the prevalent implementation of performance management, what you find now is a process. We are doing it so that it look like we are doing it right. Process that is not continuous, instead is either annual or biannual. And it is not owned by the line manager. It's actually an administrative tasked by HR. So HR says, let's set objectives. You say, oh, HR has said we set objectives. Let's do it. We set, and then we put them in a folder somewhere and forget about them. Then maybe at the middle of the year, HR again, the half year reviews. And then hell breaks loose, in the sense that people start looking for the objectives they set in January. That tells you now what compliance, because HR has said do it, we do it. But it is not really meeting the objectives that I talked about, improving employees, aligning with organizational goals, or helping us determine the training needs for the employee so that we can develop them and grow them. So that is how things have shifted from the original and initial goal of performance management. And you have many organizations doing it so that they are seen they are doing it. What are you achieving with this process? They have no straight. Now,
if I can,
you asked something about, therefore, what should be done by organization. And for me, the first question is, do we understand why we are doing performance management? Reasons for us to do performance management. And a key reason is so that it supports us to achieve our business. That's a key reason. The second one is, in order to achieve those business goals, these must achieve their goals. So we monitor continuously, identify those gaps, and intervene appropriately. Intervene with the resources. So, skill issue, provide training. If it's a motivation issue, how do we engage and motivate? That is the way, on just in a high level, that is the way organizations are to approach.
now, if I may add on to what you've said and maybe put a slight twist to it, I think a lot of times when we talk about organizational strategy, what is our strategy for the next 3 years, 5 years, I don't think it is cascaded down correctly because it is left like a CSUT agenda. But I think people fail to understand that for that strategy to work, there are implementations that are needed. And through those implementations, that is how you actually, review performance. So you come from an organizational level, then you go to the HOD. What does that strategy mean for your department? Then from that, you go further. Who are the line managers, and take it further. So as you've said, when it is viewed as a compliance aspect, when it is viewed as an administrative, go set goals. You're not setting goals for, you just dreamt. I think Rosalind needs to do XYZ by this time. It should be Rosalind does this role, and Rosalind roles, this is how it, pegs or it taps into the departmental strategy, which taps into the organizational strategy. Now, how can we improve that? That people need to understand that, goal setting is not a HR affair. Goal setting is a cascaded down affair. And if I may read a question that we've received here, where is the balance for an employee considering some institutions may put crazy targets? That tells us that there's a huge disconnect about people understanding the organizational strategy is cascaded down to departmental, cascaded further down to the individual. So what are your thoughts on that?
But let me put it this way. Organizations that have mastered the art of business planning will do the strategy And that strategy may be for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Once the strategy is implemented, then they will go into process transitioning that strategy into execution. And how does that happen? That every year, before that year, they do a plan for the. So actually, many organizations now, many organizations are doing it as we are. It normally starts around October, so that by December, they already have what we call the annual plan, which has been extracted out of the strategy for that organization. In that annual plan, everything that the organization will do the next 1 year. Now, who are the people who are doing this? Normally, it is the executive team working closely with a select team of people from each department, so that as you are planning for the year, the people in that organization in the different sections are also coming. We need to have
Sorry,
a bit
Stephen,
of a
come again.
hoping that things will start. I didn't
Yes.
expect this to happen. Yes.
Don't worry.
So, yes, the annual plan is derived from the strategic plan. And the annual plan is summarized in one document called the corporate plan. That corporate plan is owned by the CEO. Now, one of the most powerful tools to the annual plan is what we call the balance scorecard. And come up with action plans that touch on every aspect of the business and allow you to come up with goals every unit in the organization. The people who do that is the executive team, but working with specific people from their units. Now, once they have done that and come up with the corporate plan, they will then extract plans for every unit within the organization, every department, and summarize it again, for example, using the balance scorecard. Then they have the responsibility to go to their unit and communicate those plans. First of all, give a high-level summary of the overall organization plan, and then zero into the extracted plan for their unit. Only when they have communicated that and explained it, now they ask their teams or the employees in their section to set their goals based on that fundamental plan. And you can therefore see alignment, or what we call cascading. You have the strategy, which is several years. Then we have corporate annual plan owned by the CEO. And then you will have the annual plan for each department. And that annual plan, each unit head has to go and explain it to it, so that they understand how that departmental plan is feeding into the corporate plan. And therefore, they start seeing themselves as contributors to the big plan. And after they have done that, then they tell their people, you can now go and sit and derive your individual plan based on what I have. That is how we ensure what an employee is doing at their level is actually driving business.
Now, you've put it so well, the aspect of ownership.
Yes.
From the CEO to, it doesn't matter if it's a HOD, cascading down to the employee. Now, that means we need to change our mindsets and our understanding or perception or attitudes towards performance management, because historically it is deemed, as you rightly said, HR will send an email and say, which is at the start of the new year, can people set the goals? It is the time for the media reviews. You need to have discussions. But the full ownership of performance management has not been accepted as it should. Sometimes it is because, the leaders within those units have not been trained,
Yes.
or the leaders in those units have a very negative, they see it as an administrative work. They don't view it as it is part and parcel of their domain. They need to take ownership. How should we, or yes, what should we do, or how can we change these mannerisms, these perceptions, the mindset that people need to understand from exco to the employee at the very bottom? People understand what it is about and then how they contribute. How do we change that mindset of ownership?
So I'll put it this way, because I've implemented a performance management process or system from scratch. And one thing that I realized was partly the reason why it doesn't work is ignorance. We assume that because someone has the title of manager or director or name it, that they know these things automatically. I have been enrolled as a consultant into organizations who are struggling with some of the things. And one of the things that I realized was my people perish because of lack of knowledge. More often than not, we assume because someone has the title of manager, they know. Let me surprise you that there are many managers who do not know. And some of them actually are offended when you tell them that maybe I need to explain this process to you so that you understand. And if you call them into a training, they will not attend unless a higher up person says everybody must attend. And that is where the process starts to break. So what is my take? My take is one, that you must have in place a very clear performance management policy. And I insist on it because that policy document will tell you about the purpose of performance management. Two, it will tell you about the objectives of performance management, which are the things we discussed at the beginning of optimizing performance, the linking of employee the business goals, uh, growing people in their careers and all that. So those are objectives which are put in the. Then number three is the process, which must be described clearly in the policy. Number one, where do we start the process? Actually, the process starts with the annual planning process, the one I described earlier. Before you even come to setting objectives, there must be annual planning that leads into a corporate plan, which is owned by the CEO. And it is out of that corporate plan that we get departmental plans and we get individual. At that point, then we go into individual goal setting. That is a process. Then after you've set goals, you sit back, you keep those goals. No, the policy document will describe continuous performance management. What happens between setting goals and reviewing? In between there, we have a stage called continuous performance management, which includes the things we talked about, feedback and coaching and intervening so that you are optimizing the performance. You're providing resources. If training is required, that training is provided, and so on and so forth. And then we have stages, mid-year, half-year, quarterly, where we are doing reviewing and the documentation. It doesn't end there. So you have reviewed. What next? So we have what we call outcomes. And these outcomes must be clearly documented in the policy document, that you can be taken for further training, that you will get on-the-job training, rotation, and so on. Or if you are in a multinational, you can be taken to another country and you study from there, you learn and you grow. And then there are promotions. And then there are bonuses. And then there are increases. These are coming out of that. And this should be. The other thing that I've seen in organizations that is not properly documented is how do we rate people? How do we score people? And how do we rate them? So people are doing performance management, but if you look at how people are being scored, it's not a very clear process. So the policy will set these things. Now, the other aspect is what happens when there is consistent poor performance, and the dreaded PIP. And are we very clear how that PIP should come into this and how it should be framed? And once someone has been placed on PIP, how do we manage that process until it? And what happens if the PIP fails? So the policy document is very important because do the parties in this process understand their responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of the line manager? What are the responsibilities of the employee? What are the responsibilities of HR? And that policy will make it very clear that performance management is the work of the line manager, and the HR is just facilitator of the process. You see, all that is documented. So once you have the policy document, you need the right tools that go together with that policy. What is it? We're talking about the template. We're talking about the rating scale. We are talking about something that will dictate how you do pay. So a pay increment policy document, a bonus policy document. And these are very unique documents that need to be in place even before you start that process, so that when you come to the end of the year, you are not again asking yourself questions. You know straight away very well what you will do once the outcome of performance management has been achieved. So those templates, all of them, you need to have them ready and clearly defined and showing exactly what happened. I did a calibration process for a company, an organization in Uganda. And when I pushed hard and asked for, let's do it in a particular way, it revealed a lot of things in terms of how the process was being implemented. And they had to go back to the drawing board because they then realized that they don't have things are not working. Last but not least, yes, you may have a wonderful framework in the form of that policy document, and have you trained people on it? Have you trained them? You don't assume managers know these things. And that's why I talked about their managers think because the title is there, they know what they don't. So make sure that you train everybody in the organization on that framework. And I did that in one of the organizations. And people are very clear on what they needed to do at every step. So if you ask me, one of the reasons why performance management fails, one is because on that framework.
You have mentioned a lot of things that to many it would be very controversial. For example, aspects to do with promotions, bonuses, increases, training. You and I know very well that sometimes someone can have the unfortunate situation whereby their line manager or their head does not like them, or they have a very poor relationship. And therefore, how the performance is done when it comes to their performance management, it is not objective. It is very emotive. Sometimes we know very well that if the line manager is not in a good mindset, if they're having a bad day, the probability of having a constructive discussion actually narrows significantly. And aspects to do with policies, the performance management policy, promotions, that clarity of how compensation and benefits is done and how it links, performance management links to these other aspects. Oftentimes it is not open to everyone. It is a policy that has been designed. It is somewhere in a locker. How can we change this? How can we change from that like authoritative kind of mindset whereby I'm thinking I'm your line manager, Roslyn, what I say goes, instead of having a continuous discussion with you one-to-ones? Let us see, where are you performing well, where are you struggling, how can I help you perform? and everyone knows what the expectations are. How can we change these
Yes.
attitudes? Because this is change management 101. How can we make it easier
Okay.
in organizations?
For me, yes, for me, it's the framework. The framework must, in a way, that one, a manager cannot impose that the setting of goals is a collaboration between the manager and the. And how does it happen? The manager communicates the plan at, say, departmental level and says that it is expected that as a department, for example, we are expected to generate revenue of 100 million as a department. And these 100 million come from you guys. However, sometimes, for example, let's say it's a regional thing. So we have people in Mombasa, people in Nairobi, people in Western. The manager will use common sense to say there's more money in Nairobi than in Mombasa, and there's more money in Mombasa than in Kisumu, for example, and take the 100 million and distribute it based on potential and explain it to the employee. We know that there is more money in Nairobi, so we expect that the people in Nairobi will give us 50 million. And because there is less money in Mombasa, we expect Mombasa to give us that million. It is based on the reality on the ground, and that everyone else will see it. So open communication, communicating the goals and showing how they tie into the overall is very important. So as a department, 100 million. But people in Nairobi, because Nairobi is where we have high potential, will give us 50 million. And the people in Mombasa, where there's less potential, they will give us 30. But in Kisumu, it is even more difficult to make that money, so they will give us 20. The three guys in those regions will be fairness because they understand how the market outlook is. So open discussion of the objectives and ensuring that everybody is comfortable with what you have said. So that back and forth, so that we finally agree, actually creates a lot of what you call ownership. The employees then start feeling that this is a process we are part of, and I now accept the 50 million if I'm in Nairobi because the manager will open with me and discuss that. That is part one. Number two is that continuous management. So now we must have a reporting system that enables us to see on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, how the performance is going. And then we keep asking ourselves questions, why is it not happening? Or is it happening too fast? Did we not get the figures right? And so on and so forth. And then interventions take place, like I explained that. Is it a skill problem? Is it a resources problem? Or we just missed it? We didn't see clearly how market was going to be easy or challenging. And then we are according. Then we come to, and by the way, because of that open communication about the performance, when it comes to the review time, the employee is asked to review themselves first. So we say, you know the numbers, review yourself. And then after that review, present the report to the manager, and then there is a discussion. That discussion, by the way, is not arguing over those numbers. If you have been discussing these numbers over a period, you are no longer arguing over the numbers. What you are really discussing is what can we do differently? For example, if the numbers are not matching our expectation, what can we change so that the numbers come up? But if the numbers were way too low and now we have surpassed them very early, then how can we adjust the new goal so that it's realistic and so on? So open communication in performance management, but the employee must feel that they're part of that process.
That is a very good close of that statement, which actually, it has a huge impact or a direct correlation with employee experience.
Yeah.
Now, for organizations that have lost credibility in this process, how can they rebuild the trust? Because it doesn't mean that because an organization has, fumbled on their performance management all through, that they do not have the opportunity to rethink the process and, work it out. How can an organization rebuild its credibility and trust in such a situation?
So, according to me, it's what we call back to the basics. You know and you understand that you have not gotten the process right. That in the process, you have mistreated people, or you have made decisions that have not made people. And let me give you a very good example. There is a process that really abused organizations called calculation. In this process, basically what happens is that it is actually used to exit people from organizations. So you fix and say 10% must go between this value and this value and this. That is equally the lower side. And then maybe 20% can be the good performers, and then the average performers are 70%. And then you say the 10% must take. You are abusing the process of ideally. Calibration is supposed to check the quality of the process. So what you do is to just change course and say we are no longer going to do calibration this way. We are going to do it for this reason. And that what are the usual reasons? The reasons are quality assurance. What will you do? You will sample the high performers, the average performers, and the low performers. And what are you checking? Instead of fixing people with the calibration, what you are checking is that people were scored based on their actual performance. So the guys who got high scores, they actually got the high scores because they performed very well. And the guys who got low scores actually got low scores because their performance was poor. Now, what could go wrong here? One, for the guys who got high scores, what you are trying to remove is favoritism. That actually they did not deserve those scores. So you want to make sure that when managers score people highly, it's because they deserve those, and there was no favoritism. On the lower side, you also want to confirm that the guys who are scored lowly, it's because they actually didn't perform. And it's not that the manager liked them and that they had actually performed well, but the manager just decided to downgrade their score because they have a bond with them. So calibration now is working to improve the quality, not to fix people. So an organization that has struggled with performance management must go back and reflect how they are doing and ask, is this the way? And then look at specific things they are doing, like calibration, and say, is this really the purpose of calibration? Or should we change the process so that calibration is done for the right reasons and it enriches the whole process? But most importantly, the organization must know the right way first. They must know this is the right way of doing it, and even document it, like I said, in a policy, and then start implementing the right. Yeah.
I hear aspects to do with objectivity, to get
Yes.
rid of biases, of favoritism. And sometimes you find people that have genuinely performed highly will
Yes.
suffer in some certain situations of calibration because of
Yes.
bias or whatever,
Yes.
favoritism, etc.
Yes.
In such a situation, and we know very well that biases, favoritism, witch hunts do happen, and
Yes.
they affect employee relations and engagement.
Yes.
Going by that example that the objectivity of the whole process, that clarity of the process,
Yes.
how can we, by doing so, yes, we will definitely be turning the tide to ensure that people are more engaged, people are more, you have less employee relations, negative employee relations,
Yes.
and even matters to do with PIPs, performance
Yes.
improvement plans.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Sometimes they are implemented, not because the person is not performing. Sometimes you just have witch hunting happening.
Yes, yes.
So what are those checks and balances you would recommend for us to have at the back of our minds always, to ensure, so that we can ensure that we are not losing good talent because you have the wrong manager,
Yes.
and it happens a lot in organizations. What are your thoughts on that?
So, like I say, it's about the process. Foolproof the process. How do you foolproof the process? Number one, you make sure that employee and manager are well trained. Set smart objectives. People use the word smart, but I can tell you, having looked at forms from many organizations, that is, I think, one of the most abused terms in performance management. And I want to give you a very good example. I talked about 100 million. If we set a smart goal around that number, it should not happen that at the end of the year, when we are coming to check achievement of the same, that we cannot reach agreement on what the employee has achieved. So, this is what I tell people. The first quality improvement you make on a performance management system is to make sure that people are setting goals that are measurable. And we must understand what measurable is, that are specific and measurable. And I usually say, you must do a test on every goal that you set for measurability. And if it cannot be measured, then that goal is not valid. And don't even include it in your plan. Because if you can measure it, you have a specific goal. You have a very clear target. The target is clear. And when it comes to the time of discussing the achievement, it will be, did you surpass that number? Did you meet it? Or you are below it? And you should have actually within your processes a way of measuring that number and being able to know at a particular time what is the achievement so far. So that is how now, let's say the 100 million number, we reach half a year, and the system is telling us that we have achieved 50 million or 48 million. Let me use 48, not 50. We know we are halfway through the year and we are at 48. When you look at that, our target for half year should be 50. And basically what it's telling us is that we are doing well. And the manager cannot change that number. Why should they change it? We said for the whole year is 100. Now we are at mid-year, now 48 million. And we know that if we were doing very well, it should actually be very close to 50. But we are not. So what will I say in my review as an employee? I'll say, I think I'm on track. Because 48 is not very far from. Now tell me how a manager is going to change that number and what will be the reasons for them to change that number. And if they do, and downgrade it, say to 35, then that is an unfair practice. Because the system has told us the revenue is now at 48 million. If the manager changes that is unfair.
What you've said there is data is the source of truth.
Yes.
Every goal that you set needs to be measurable, not just because it's smart, not just because M stands for measurable, but you should actually link realistically how that number comes or how that statistic, the embracing data, embracing analytics, and embracing how different matrices come into play.
Yes.
You've mentioned something very, very critical, aspects to do with sometimes poor behaviors because of, say, managers, where, for example, the employee can prove that, I've achieved the 48 million, but my line manager is of a contrary opinion.
Yes.
How does this come about if we are all looking at the same system? if we are all looking at the same data, what does
Yes.
that tell us about leadership and the impact of poor leadership when it comes to its impact on performance management, engagement, employee relations? What are your thoughts on that?
And remember, I talked about calibration.
Mm-hmm.
That we could be doing calibration for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
If a leader knows that nobody is going to check my work, what will they do? They can do anything. So in organizations where they know that these are possibilities and where the leaders can actually become subjective, that is where now calibration comes in. And calibration is usually a group exercise. So we are, say, 6, 7 managers. We go into a boardroom, and each manager presents their scores. And out of those scores, we say, let's pick 3 people for high scores, 3 people for middle scores, and 3 people for low scores. Show us the template, how you score. Show us how this employee was scored. And so for the high ones, we want to see a justification that actually they achieved that number that gave them that high score. For the low ones, we want to see that they were not scored low and yet they had achieved the goal. Once you start showing managers that you will check their
Sorry, we lost you there. You were talking about once you show your managers that you will be reviewing their work. It's to do with checks and balances.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
We were talking about checks and balances,
Yes.
where you say the high performance, mid performance, and the lower performance. Proceed.
Yes. Yes. So what I was saying is, once you show managers that you will check, then they start doing the right. Look, even in countries, we put checks and balances for presidents. We create other organizations like parliament and judiciary so that we have a balance of power. Why should it happen that in organizations, managers are given all the leeway to make decisions about livelihoods of people and they are not being checked? So what I'm saying is, even in performance management, instead of using calibration to victimize people, what you should be doing is to use calibration to check the quality of work of managers scoring the employee. And once you do that, then the managers start doing the right thing because they know someone will check.
I couldn't agree more. The need for checks and balances, and more so also consequences. You talked about parties need to be aware of their responsibilities,
Yes.
individuals, the managers, etc. And there needs to be clear demarcation of consequences where, for example, abuse of process, etc., so that you do not find yourself having low engagement as a result of, actually the poor factor in that whole equation is the manager.
Yes.
Quick question. Sometimes employees can fail to meet their targets because of workload.
Yes.
There have been, for example, people resign
Yes.
and their replacements either take very long to come through or they never get replaced, and that extra workload is dumped on the employee.
Yes.
And then the employee is now being measured not only based on what was mapped out initially as their goals or the KPIs, but now this extra workload that has come through,
Yes.
which obviously has a negative, more often than not, it has a negative impact about the overall performance of this employee.
Yes.
How can we mitigate this poor behavior where, if people have resigned, replacements need to come through, but also if the replacements are not coming through, how do we go about ensuring fair workload or good practice and avoiding, negative consequences to the employee?
In an organization that is well structured and doing its stuff the right way, the performance management process will allow for employees to give their views around how the performance management process has been conducted. Now, how is that possible? One, that within the review document, there is a place for comments, and that employees are allowed to speak openly about their experience with that process. Unfortunately, and I'm telling you this, employees sometimes fear to open up and put on paper what their real experience has. Okay, so that is one avenue that employees can use, and the organization should provide that opportunity for the employee to make comments around how they have experienced the process. For example, I had a lot of work. My workload doubled when X left. That should be put into that comment section. The second thing is organizations that work well do what we call satisfaction engagement surveys. And those engagement surveys then reveal the issues that employees are going through in terms of their experience in the organization. And by the way, I want to give you a very good example. I consulted for an international NGO. And the reason why I was brought in, because they had done an engagement survey, and that engagement survey revealed very low of management and leadership. And it zeroed in on what we call first line managers. When they drilled deeper, they realized that the problem was sitting at first line managers. What did they ask me to do? They asked me to develop a new manager's guide, which I did within a period of 3 months. Once I finished that new manager's guide, we went in, they asked me to translate that guide into a training for new managers. And then we trained people on management skills, touching on the issues that had been identified in the engagement survey. One of them is how performance management was managed. So it was a part of that training. Then next, they did the next cycle of the engagement survey. And interestingly, this I was given now by the management after I'd left. They told me the engagement scores on management and leadership were up. Why? Because out of the first engagement score, they were able to identify that there was a leadership or a management problem which was affecting how employees were being managed, especially for performance management. They intervened by coming up with a new manager's guide as well as training for the managers. And then when they did the second round of engagement survey, it revealed that there was an improvement in management and leadership. So a good or a well-organized organization will keep on checking employee experience. The engagement survey is good because it's anonymous. It doesn't pinpoint who gave the feedback. Therefore, people are more free to provide that information candidly. And once they have provided the information, the thing that that organization must do then is to make sure that they get the results and implement those results, the actions out of those results. And when they do it, like these organizations that are consulted, then they start seeing an improvement. You have improved management skills. Within those management skills, one of them is managing performance. And then you start seeing a change. in the way employees perceive how their performance is being managed. So we have the comments within the process itself, where the employee is given an opportunity to give feedback on their experience on that process. And then we have independent process like engagement surveys that also can give you very useful information that allows you to change the process or improve it or improve management skills.
You have brought up a very crucial item, feedback. Be it direct feedback where you can have it in a town hall, but also through feedback channels that are anonymous or even surveys.
Yes.
And organizations that take this feedback, take the insights from the feedback, and go ahead to implement that. It actually says a lot about the organizational maturity.
Yes.
Because truth be told, not many people are open to this feedback. Truth be told, some of these systems are not as anonymous as they are deemed to be. And therefore, people will not be very open to provide that feedback. As we come to the tail end of, this discussion, what does a modern, effective performance management approach look like in today's dynamic workplace? AKA millennials, Gen Z, boomers, Xers, you name it. We have pretty much a lot of generations within the workforce and a lot of opinions. And therefore, the performance management systems that have been practiced over time, they are being challenged. In some organizations, they are moving from yearly conversations to, as you correctly said, continuous conversations, because that's what performance management is, and that's how it should be implemented. So, in today's world and the future, what are these changes we are facing in performance management, and how can we improve? Because yes, the dynamism is here to stay.
Yes. Now, let me put it this way: that one, this is not about generations or whatever. First of all, think through the process you want to implement and document it. I talked about this from the beginning. Think through that process, the way you want to implement it, and think about business objectives. Think about departmental objectives. Think about the individual objectives. How will you go through that process? Then think about setting the goals. How will we set the goals? Do we have the right tool, the templates, and so on? Then think about what will happen between setting goals and reviewing. You need to think about it and also document it. And think about the outcome. What comes out of this process? And please understand, performance management is so powerful that it affects other processes in the organization. Number one, it affects the reward. No question about it. It affects learning and development. No question about it. It affects talent management and succession planning. You know, the 9 grid box.
Yes.
Learning and development, the TNS. Reward and compensation, pay increases, promotions, and bonuses, and share options, all tied to performance management. It might touch on grievances, like you say, when now employees are complaining, do they have a formal process through which they can complain? Grievance process. Disciplinary. So when you put someone on PIP and it fails, then it has to go into disciplinary. And then you start seeing that this process is so key that you need to think through it properly and document it properly. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is, please don't assume that everybody knows what they are. So train them. Just train them and train them on that framework that you have implemented so that they can do it right. Number 3, ensure that conversations are taking place. Find a way to check and ensure that conversations are taking place. And now I come to the genesis. Gen Zs want to be part of the solution. So you give them feedback, but not in a commanding way. You quickly switch to coaching, where you are asking them, now that we have this problem, what do you think should be the solution? And they become part of the solving. Then they feel very nice, because most of them will tell you that they want to see their meaningful contribution. And so the best way to challenge them is to shift the conversation quickly from feedback and challenge them and say, now that we have this problem, what do you think will be the solution? And be also reasonable that if they give you a solution that is workable, work with them to implement that solution, and they will feel very nice. Last but not least, and these many organizations are struggling with it, if you said in your policy that you will reward, please don't change the rules at the end of that process. Reward them. Then the whole process becomes meaningful because they can see the outcome of their labor throughout the year. You cannot pretend at the beginning of the year that you will reward people, but when it comes to the end, after you've done the evaluation and the results are there, mark you, and please let's understand this. If you had goals which were aligned, then if the organization performs, the employees also. If that is the case, then what you need to do is to ensure that at the end of the year, that performance is rewarded. Finally, we are in the age of technology. So if you have thought through your framework properly, then automate it. Automate it. I did this 3 years ago, where we thought through everything. And once we had done the templates properly and everything, and we know which information will go where, we know where, how we'll rank people, and know this one is a 1, this one is a 2, this one is a 3, and so on. And we know when someone is reviewing themselves, the kind of data that they need to enter to show their achievement. Once you've thought through all that, then you call in the IT people and describe to them that framework. They will go and translate it into an automated system, which then becomes very easy for employees and managers to use, and you will have a flawless process. Thank you.
That is, there are very many points of wisdom that you've mentioned. The beauty of coaching in enabling meaningful work.
Yes.
And when it comes to coaching and meaningful work, there is need for humility, especially when it comes to the part of the leadership.
Yes.
Sometimes it is assumed that the direction can only be said or be provided for by the leader, and sometimes it is the reverse, because most of the time the best people to offer solutions are the ones that are on the ground actually handling the situations at hand. So coaching, yes, meaningful work by all means, but humility should be at the core. You mentioned something very critical to do with follow through by organizations. And this has happened to many people. The policy is there. There's an email somewhere. There was a town hall somewhere. Someone stood up, gave a beautiful speech. But when the time came for them to honor their end of the bargain, the tables or the tune changes. And people wonder why that trust is broken, why the engagement is no longer there, why there is no loyalty, why even their customer experience scores have reduced. So this is a challenge to organizations. Doesn't matter which side of the divide you sit on, follow through must come through. And last but not least, yes, the beauty of technology and automation. There are systems out here that will actually review past data of sessions that have been held, and they can actually give you insights about the trends that are happening or what you should expect. So we really need to embrace, technology and automation. Now, you mentioned something also to do with PIP, performance improvement plans,
Yes, yes,
and how when it is handled well or not handled well, it can lead to a disciplinary situation.
yes,
I think we need to bring clarity on the differentiation between a performance improvement plan and the normal performance management, because sometimes I think people put the two and two in hand, yet
yes,
these are two unique processes.
yes.
What is your advice to that line manager that is having either a member of the team or the team is struggling?
Yes.
They do not know what to do next, and at the back of their mind, maybe they have identified an individual or two who needs to be on a
Yes.
performance improvement plan.
Yes.
If I was a new team leader and I was in
Yes.
this situation, what advice would you give me to
Mm-hmm.
go about people or individuals that are having poor performance and how to handle that correctly
Mm-hmm.
without biases, without being, emotive, objectively? What advice can you give me in that regard? Performance management, it is not working for this individual. I'm responsible for that as the line manager. What should I do? How should I do it? And what are the pitfalls I should look out for?
So PIP comes up when we have consistent underperformance. Please underline the word consistent. Now, for you to identify consistent underperformance, you must have been having those conversations with them. You must have been monitoring. You cannot leave an employee for 6 months and wake up at the end of the 6 months and say, I'm putting you on PIP without justification. So what are we saying? If you are going to implement a good performance improvement plan, and so that it is not questioned, then you must have been monitoring so that you can then sit down with the employee and clearly point out areas where there has on this one you have not performed, on this one you have not performed, on this one you have not performed, and the employee is in agreement. So that's the first part. The second part is implementing that PIP then. Now, remember I talked about a policy document. Within that policy, there will be a procedure for implementing the PIP. It must be documented clearly. For example, how long can you put someone on PIP? It's not endless. How should that PIP be documented? Meaning that there will be a separate document, the PIP. This document needs to have been designed beforehand. The third issue is when someone is put on PIP, they may continue doing their normal duties, but the main focus will be on these issues that you put on the PIP. Let us say you put someone on a PIP in a period that overlaps a normal review. Ideally, that person will not be reviewed on the normal review. They will wait for their PIP review periods because they are on PIP. So it's like it subjects the other process to a side process. As much as they continue doing their work, but the focus is on these issues that were raised in the PIP. And therefore, the manager must make sure that the issues in the PIP are substantial. They are not just small issues, they are substantial. And then those issues will have very clear goals, very clear measures and targets, and therefore very clear outcomes. The other thing about a PIP, and this is what makes organizations fail in court, is the kind of support that the employee will receive during the PIP. And it must be identified. Do they need any skill improvement? And will it be provided? what is the kind of support that the manager is going to provide? And it should be documented. The manager must document how they are going to support this employee so that it is known the support that the employee will receive. And last but not least, that process will be monitored closely. There will be discussions at regular intervals. Let's say you are put on a PIP for 3 months. It should be agreed that there will be a review at the end of every. And when that review happens, action takes place and it is documented. So that again, by the time we are reaching the end of the PIP, a decision can easily be taken because those discussions have been taking place and it's very clear where the employee is. Finally, a decision has to be taken. There are 3 possible outcomes. The first outcome is that the employee has improved. They should be removed from, meaning they resume their normal performance management. Number 2, that they have improved, but they have not showed sufficient improvement. And that means that the PIP can be extended. Again, it should be very clear what they have not improved on and which is the reason why they are extending the PIP and for how long. And the last outcome is that no improvement has been observed. And if that is the case, that no improvement has been observed, in the policy document, there should be a part that describes what follows. And what it should be actually is, now the employee is put on his defense through consequence management or disciplinary management. So you are being disciplined for poor performance. So you'll be given a shock cause. And at that point, the process shifts from being performance management to disciplinary management. If you manage it like that and document everything properly as an organization, you will have fulfilled.
You have laid it out so nicely, very clear. A lot of people sometimes find it to be very complex.
Yes.
It's not complex in nature. It just needs you to be very particular, you have to articulate the reasons as to why. You just don't wake up one day and decide, I'm putting Rosalind on a PIP.
Exactly.
It has to be substantial, that if someone else was to come and find me in a PIP, if you are to exit the organization and another manager comes in, they will not wonder, really, is this a reason why you put someone on a PIP? They should actually review that documentation and the reasons to pertaining it, and they actually understand the gravity of it.
Yes.
Steve, I cannot thank you enough. We have already even gone over time because this discussion has been very engaging.
Okay.
But for me, when you talk about, the topic of the day is why performance management doesn't work in organizations. And we've gone through a journey of the need for organizations to understand, to cascade strategy from the organization all the way down to individual. The need to understand that there are 3 layers of performance: organization, the corporate, departmental, and individual. We have looked at the need to train managers to understand this process and to also, for all parties, HR included, to not see it as an administrative task, but as a strategic enabler for the organization. We have looked at the importance of having policies, the performance policies, the cop and ben, how do we do our promotions? How do we, the bonuses, the increases, the promotions, all of those need to be clearly mapped out policies that have clear demarcations of responsibilities that people have been trained on. It is not just a document that is in the HR system or in a SharePoint, folder that, you go to that, folder, you will find the information. No. People have taken the initiative to actually look at that. We have looked at the importance of having continuous discussions and not just seasonal. This is not a seasonal affair, it is a continuous affair. And before I continue, there's a question that has come through. How about sales companies where employee performance is measured on a monthly basis, even for the new recruits? So salespeople, you have the targets. Obviously, it is revenue based, so I can understand why there is the monthly review.
Yes.
What are your comments, for example, for people that are in sales, and obviously their targets, they are target driven. So maybe they have a quarterly target that has been broken down to a monthly target. How should that performance discussion be handled so that you can give a response to Beryl?
Between me and you, that is a straightforward issue. In fact, salespeople should not be the ones talking. Why? Because it's not difficult to measure. The numbers are there. If in many organizations, they are in the system. So if the sales are not happening, they are very good. And let's look at a seasoned salesperson. If the sales are not happening, either that person or that person has not been properly treated so that they can sell properly, or that person has a personal issue. Remember, when we are discussing non-performance, we look for the story behind the story. Yes, the person is not performing, but what is really causing it? And that's why we must do the feedback and then move to something else called coaching. And the coaching can easily reveal for you what the real issues are, and then also guide you to the solution. So for a seasoned salesperson, the target is a number. There was a basis attached to that number. Remember, I talked about 50 million, 30 million, 20 million. 50 million for Nairobi because there's potential. Less potential in Mombasa, 30 million. And even lesser potential in Kisumu, 20 million. So we selected that number based on some knowledge we have about the market. And then now we have an experienced salesperson with the right competence. So if it is not happening, we need to go back and find out why it not happening and resolve issues, stopping that person from not giving those numbers. Now let's talk about a new guy. A guy who is new in the role may not perform like the other person who has discussed. So it will be unreasonable for you to set a high number for them. What do? You give them a graduated growth. You should understand, normally when someone gets into this business and are new, that the numbers will grow like this. So an absolute target is an unreasonable one. But you should see consistently a growth in that person's numbers, because they are also getting to learn the organization, they are getting to learn the products, they are getting to learn the market. And that then you should be realistic enough to understand those numbers will not just hit maximum suddenly, but they will grow consistently. By the way, I've seen this in organizations. Someone is given a new role, and then the expectation is very high. That is unrealistic. The best is to understand how those numbers can naturally grow. And only when that is not happening, you can start questioning. Now, because also that we know that a person in a new role may struggle or will face challenges, that's why we put them on probation. And the contracts are different. For a seasoned salesperson, once they are confirmed, we have very high expectations from them. For a new person in a new role, we put them on probation. And by the way, the fact that they are on probation means also that there are obligations on the line manager to support. And the line manager must do certain things to make sure that they help this person grow their sales. So it's just the understanding of the manager. This is a pro sales person. This is my expectation on this. This is a newcomer in a new role. This should be my expectation of this. There will be no problem. But if you put an expectation on a newcomer, similar to the guy who has enough knowledge about that, then you are wrong.
couldn't agree more, and I wouldn't even add anything further to that.
Yes.
To the next question, how can you implement policy management in a system where managers have in mind that they are fine and cannot take any idea from their subjects? I think you had touched on this where you had to do a consultancy for one of your clients on this. But for the benefit of Stephen, how interesting your namesake. How can you give? What are your thoughts on this?
You've heard of the frog story. The frog story, a frog was put in water and the water was started to be boiled slowly. and the frog looked at the water and it was looking, it seems to be getting warmer, but I'm okay. And then I can see some steam on the surface, but I'm okay. Now, many managers are in the frog situation. So unless there is external intervention, sometimes it's very difficult in managers' perspective. And that is why many organizations, and you'll notice this, many organizations, when the CEO changes, it is most likely that many of the senior managers will also leave. Because from the book called Good to Great, the CEO will then ask, am I having the right leaders on the bus? And they will do their own assessment to determine whether they have the right leaders on the bus. If they find they don't have, then they will remove those that they feel not good enough, their vision and ambitions. So, even my namesake, let me tell you, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to convince someone who is not even aware of their problem that they have a problem. And that is why sometimes then when such a person is speaking to the younger generation and they are pointing out things, they may not even see what is being pointed out. Now, by the way, that brings me to one of my favorite topics. And what is it? More often than not, the success of leaders is hinged on their emotional intelligence. Let me summarize it. 80 to 90% of your leadership practices will be influenced by your own emotional intelligence. What I'm talking about, leaders who will be successful will be very strong in the 5 competencies of emotional intelligence. 1, self-awareness. Does the leader know their strengths, weaknesses, and the things that they struggle with? Because that self-awareness is very important. Once you are self-aware, then you self-manage. You can control yourself. For example, that you should have that ability to accept that you don't know. And now a Gen Z here who is in your team knows better than you, and you should listen to them when they suggest certain. That is emotional intelligence. Number 3, what drives your decisions? What are your intentions? So that self-drive and whatever, third competency under emotional intelligence, it helps you to step back sometimes and ask yourself, why did I make that decision? What was the motivation? Actually, it's called self-motivation. What was the motivation behind my decisions? And so those first 3 are about yourself. But the other 2 are, 1, your empathy. Do you put yourself in the other person's shoes to understand where they are coming from, especially when they criticize you or they suggest an alternative? And the last one is, at the end of everything, did you build the relationship or you destroyed it? Your social skill, your ability to maintain meaningful relationships. So that is emotional intelligence for you. But what does it do for you as a leader? That it influences your leadership practices. So the things you do on a day-to-day basis, more than 80% of the time, they are being driven by your emotional intelligence. So the leaders who will adjust to those circumstances that Stephen is asking about are the leaders who are very clear about their emotional intelligence and they are doing something about improving that emotional intelligence. Then that will influence their leadership practices. Now, how will leadership practices influence the whole organization? it will influence the working environment, the working condition, and how you are seen as a leader. Now, how is that important? Let me just summarize it. One, employees who are well treated will never allow their manager to fail. They will go out of the way to make sure that the manager succeeds. Employees who are well treated start feeling that they belong in that organization. So engagement goes up. And they start seeing the organization as their. And they start practicing something called organizational citizenship, which means now the employees will do things without being told. They do things without. Now, once you achieve that goal, the outcome is very good organizational results. So I've given leaders who are here today the secret of being a successful leader. One, work on your emotional intelligence. Two, that will influence your access as a leader. And three, that will influence the work environment. The end result is you will have a very well-oiled machine, which is the organization. And you will start seeing the results that you never thought you could achieve. Thank you.
If I can add on to what you have said, which is very critical, it reminds me of a project by Google called Oxygen, and they were looking at management behaviors,
Yes.
and they identified 10 management behaviors of what makes a good leader. And in one of my former roles, in-house roles, I actually implemented a survey based on these behaviors. And the behaviors are coaching, be a good coach, empower the team and don't micromanage,
Yes.
create an inclusive team environment, focus on productivity and results, be a good communicator, support career development and discuss performance, have a clear vision and strategy, have key technical skills, collaboration, and last but not least, express interest in success and well-being, which actually plugs into what you're talking about, plugs into EQ 101%. So when it comes to an organization, it's not just the employees, it is also the leadership structure of it, the organizational maturity. How open are they to feedback? And that's why when we were having this discussion, we were talking about the feedback channels and the surveys. A lot of people have trust issues with the anonymity because it is not often the situation. And sometimes organizations use this feedback to rat out people and get rid of them. So there has to be that objective within the organization of across all parties for people to come to the table with that discernment that feedback is a gift and not a threat. If we are to use examples of, say, Kodak or Nokia, when technology came, they had the best, they were the best of their time at that time, but they did not embrace technology for what it is. And what happened? Brands came into play, and the likes of Nokia, the likes of Kodak, the likes of Blockbuster were overtaken by events. Blockbuster, Netflix came into picture. That was it. So I think it is important that we adapt to the changing times and we actually seek feedback. So as we come to a close to this discussion, we have touched across pretty much end to end when it comes to performance management. And critical for everyone to understand is the importance of communication, good communication, open communication, the importance of strong emotional intelligence, the importance of having policies in place and following through. It is not a tick box, it is not an administrative item, it is a strategic enabler for any organization. Any parting words from you, Stephen, as we come to a close?
All I would like to say is that performance management is a science. Don't go into it if you don't understand the why of performance management. First, understand the why of performance management. Then craft a framework for your organization, understanding fully the why. Craft that framework, document it, communicate it, and implement. You will definitely get the results you're looking for. Don't do it because organization A is doing it. Understand your own unique situation and perspective as an organization. Understand the why of performance management. Craft that framework, document it, and implement it. You will definitely see the results. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Understand it, document it, implement it. Such a beautiful way to come to a close of this discussion. I cannot thank you enough for anyone or all people that have joined us live through YouTube or live via LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining this discussion. Thank you for always, joining us every 2 weeks as we have these conversations on Unplugged with Ross. My name is Rosalind Miner. Thank you so much, Stephen Oleka, for having, joined us in this discussion. I can't thank you enough. And I wish you all a lovely evening wherever you are. Asante sana, and I'll see you on the next episode of Unplugged with Ross. Have a good night and goodbye.